You actually showed up. You were taken off the guest list. Security will remove you.
I have one question for Audrey. Did you sign my name on that loan?
That loan is the only reason this company is still standing. And you want to throw it away over a signature? You have embarrassed me for the last time! Men like you don't belong here.
She had spent 6 years deciding exactly who I was, a man with no money, no influence, and no way to fight back. So when my name appeared on a loan I never signed, no one in that room lost a single night of sleep over it. Marjorie had built her entire gamble on one assumption, that I was exactly as powerless as she believed. What she never once thought to check was whether that assumption was true. And now the only question was how much that mistake was going to cost her. If you've ever watched someone underestimate the wrong person, stay with this story. And if you're new here, subscribing takes 2 seconds and it means you won't miss what happens next. 6 years is a long time to believe in something. Long enough to stop questioning it. Long enough to call it home. I had met Audrey at a fundraiser for affordable housing on the east side of Atlanta. She was there representing a client, working the room the way she always did. Effortless, composed, with a smile that made people feel like they were the most important person she'd spoken to all evening. I was there because I had helped coordinate the event and forgotten to change out of my work clothes. She laughed when she saw the paint still on my forearm. She said it made me look like someone who actually did something with his day. I thought that was the best thing anyone had said to me in years. We got married 18 months later, and for a while I think we were genuinely happy. She liked that I came home tired from real work. She liked that I didn't talk about stock options at dinner or measure weekends by how many contacts I could collect. I liked that she was sharp and driven and unafraid of hard conversations. What I didn't see, what I chose not to see, was that she had married an idea of me, and ideas have a way of losing their appeal once circumstances change. Audrey was appointed CEO of Lennox Society Events the spring before everything fell apart. Her mother Marjorie had built that company over more than 20 years into one of the most prominent event management firms in Atlanta. They handled charity auctions, corporate galas, 5-star weddings, the kind of events where the guest list itself was a statement of power. When Audrey stepped into that role, she stepped into a world where everything was measured by what you wore, who you knew, and what your husband's business card said about you. My business card said I ran operations for a community housing nonprofit, and for the first time I watched that become a problem. The changes were small at first. A comment about the car I drove. A question about whether I really needed to go into a work site on the weekend. A way of introducing me at her company events that managed to sound like a compliment and an apology at the same time. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself the adjustment period would pass. But Marjorie had never hidden her opinion. She thought Audrey had made a mistake marrying me, and she said so regularly in the tone of someone observing an obvious fact. In her world, a man without a corner office and a country club membership was not a man worth keeping. Then Derek Sutter came into the picture. I had been brought in as a hospitality consultant hired by Marjorie to help Lennox Society Events pursue larger institutional contracts. He wore suits that were made for him, specifically drove a car that announced itself before he arrived, and had a talent for saying exactly what a person needed to hear in the moment they were most likely to believe it. He told Audrey she was the most capable executive he had worked with in a decade. He told her she was being held back not by the market, not by competition, but by proximity to someone without ambition. I heard that secondhand. I think Audrey meant for me to hear it. What none of them knew, what I had kept from all of them, including Audrey, was who I actually was. My father had built Rhodes Sovereign Group over the course of his lifetime. It was a private conglomerate with holdings across luxury hospitality, commercial real estate event, venue management, and investment partnerships, spanning most of the eastern United States. When he died, controlling interest passed into a trustee structure while the legal process of transferring voting rights was completed. I was the sole heir, and I had chosen to say nothing. Not because I was ashamed, not because I was hiding something that would hurt anyone, but because I wanted to know what my life looked like without that weight attached to it. I wanted to do the work I cared about. I wanted to believe the woman I married had chosen me without knowing what came with me. The house we lived in was held under Westmark Private Trust, one of the family's asset structures. Audrey had signed documents related to it before our wedding. She hadn't read them carefully. She assumed they were insurance paperwork. I found out about the loan on a Tuesday evening in late October. A credit protection alert came through on my phone while I was still in the driveway after work. I read it once and assumed it was an error. I read it again inside the house standing in the kitchen with my jacket still on. A bridge loan of $480,000 had been opened under the name of Lennox Society Events. I was listed as a personal co-guarantor. My social security number was on the application. My tax records. A copy of my driver's license. An electronic signature bearing my name. And the Westmark address the house we lived in listed as collateral. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. Not because I couldn't understand what I was reading, but because I was still trying to find a way to understand it differently. There had to be an error. There had to be a clerical mistake, a crossed file, something that would explain how my name had ended up on a loan I had never agreed to. Those documents could only have been pulled from a shared financial folder that Audrey had accessed during the period when we were applying for life insurance together. A folder I had never thought to password protect because I had never imagined there was a reason to. I asked her about it that same night. She didn't deny it. She explained that the company needed short-term working capital before the gala, that the loan would be repaid once Lennox Society Events secured the $18 million contract with Rhodes Sovereign Group, and that I wouldn't be affected in any practical way. She said all of this with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who was being unnecessarily difficult about a straightforward situation. I told her that using someone's identity without consent and forging their signature was a crime. It didn't matter that we were married. It didn't matter that the money was supposed to come back. That was when she stopped explaining and started attacking. She said I had never understood what it took to build something real. She said I was comfortable because I had never had to take a risk, and now that she was taking one, I wanted to punish her for it. Marjorie arrived not long after. I don't know if Audrey had called her, or if she simply appeared the way she always did when she sensed the conversation was going somewhere inconvenient. She told me that I had benefited from the Lennox name for 6 years, and that using my information to secure the loan was entirely reasonable given the circumstances. She said it the way she said most things, with absolute certainty and no interest in a response. I understood something clearly in that moment. They were not angry because I had raised a legal objection. They were angry because they had assumed I wouldn't. They had looked at me, at my work, my salary, my second-hand jacket, and concluded that I didn't have the resources to fight back. The forgery wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a calculation built on contempt. I spent the following days reviewing the loan documents carefully before I contacted Paige. What I found in the transaction records changed the nature of what I was looking at entirely. $64,000 had been wired to Sutter Strategic Advisory, the consulting firm registered under Derek's name. Another portion had covered expenses that had no connection to any company project. A resort stay in South Carolina booked for 2 guests. A watch delivered to Derek's apartment address, vehicle rentals, with no corresponding client invoices, service fees for consultations that produced no documentation, and a deposit on an apartment listed under Audrey's name. She had not simply used my identity to keep the company afloat. She had used the debt in my name to fund a life she was already building somewhere else. I contacted Paige Kessler that afternoon. Paige had handled legal and financial matters for the Rhodes family for 11 years, and she was not someone who required a long explanation before she understood what needed to be done. Within 24 hours, she had frozen my credit file, filed a formal loan dispute, issued a litigation hold on all Lennox Society Events financial records, and requested preservation of every cloud access log tied to the shared accounts. She also confirmed that the Westmark property could not be used as collateral under any circumstances. The trust structure made that legally impossible, regardless of what the loan documents claimed. The second call I made was to Malcolm Greer, who had been serving as acting CEO of Rhodes Sovereign Group during the trustee transition period. I gave him 2 instructions. The first was to say nothing about who I was. The second was to continue the evaluation of Lennox Society Events for the $18 million partnership contract exactly as it had been proceeding. No acceleration, no special treatment, no signal that anything had changed. I needed to see how far they would go. Because the version of me they had built in their minds, the quiet man who worked with his hands, who didn't belong in rooms like theirs, who would accept what was done to him because he had no real power to refuse. I needed to know whether that version of me would stop them, or whether they had already decided that version of me simply didn't matter at all. The investigation confirmed what part of me had already known, but hadn't been willing to name. This was not a desperate decision made under pressure. It was a plan. Paige's team pulled the access logs from the shared cloud account. Audrey had downloaded my tax records on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 months before the loan was filed, on a day I had been out of the house from 7 in the morning until past 9 at night, coordinating a roof repair project in Decatur. Derek had supplied the electronic signature template, and Marjorie had signed off on the entire structure, certain that the arrangement carried no real legal risk on their end. The fraud hadn't been committed in a moment of panic. It had been constructed carefully over months by 3 people who had looked at me and decided I was too small to be a real obstacle. The investigation also uncovered what was happening inside Lennox Society events beyond the loan. Client deposits that should have been held in protected accounts had been redirected to cover operating shortfalls. Several couples who had paid in full for their weddings had no idea that the venue's catering companies and decorators attached to their events had not yet received a single payment. A group of seasonal staff members were owed nearly 2 months of wages. Local vendors who had fulfilled their contracts were still waiting on invoices that Marjorie kept pushing to the following billing cycle. The company had been running like a Ponzi structure for at least a year, using new money to cover old debts, maintaining a polished exterior while the interior quietly collapsed. When the bank contacted Lennox Society Events to flag my dispute, Audrey called me within the hour. She did not ask questions. She accused. She said I was sabotaging her company out of jealousy, that I had always resented her success, and that filing a dispute days before the most important event of her professional life was the most selfish thing I had ever done. I listened without responding. There was nothing to respond to. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the version of me she had built in her head, the one who was supposed to absorb whatever she said and eventually go quiet. Marjorie came to the house that same evening. She stood in the entryway of a home she did not own and had never paid a cent toward, and told me I needed to withdraw the dispute immediately. She said Audrey had sacrificed years building something real while I had been playing house with a non-profit, and that the least I could do was stop obstructing the one opportunity that could secure both of their futures. When I told her that Paige was handling it and that I had nothing further to say, Marjorie looked at me the way she always had, with the particular kind of contempt reserved for people she had already dismissed as irrelevant. She said it. She left without waiting for a response because she did not believe one was coming. She did not know she was standing in a house that belonged to my family's trust. And she did not know the lawyer she was dismissing had spent 11 years handling asset disputes at a scale Lennox Society Events had never come close to. Malcolm sent me the internal audit results 10 days before the gala. I read the report at my desk at Brightwell door, closed the noise of the office moving on outside like nothing had changed. According to the audit, Lennox Society Events had never been the frontrunner for the $18 million partnership contract. Derek had told Audrey and Marjorie that the company was in a strong position, that his connections and her leadership had put them ahead of the competition. That was a lie. Their file had been quietly moved to the high-risk category weeks earlier due to unstable cash flow, outstanding vendor debts, misappropriated client deposits, and what the audit described as indicators consistent with credit fraud. Rhodes Sovereign Group had been considering 2 outcomes: a full rejection or a partial acquisition with mandatory restructuring. As the incoming principal authority, I had veto power over both. I sat with that for a long time. The straightforward move was to close it, deny the contract, let the legal consequences follow, and allow Lennox Society Events to collapse under the weight of its own decisions. Audrey and Marjorie would lose everything they had been building toward. Derek would lose his most profitable client relationship. All 3 of them had done something that warranted exactly that outcome, and I had the authority to deliver it. But the audit had also included a staffing and liability summary. Dozens of employees, dozens of vendors, clients who had trusted the company with some of the most significant events of their lives. None of those people had forged anything. None of them had made the decisions that had brought the company to this point. They had simply shown up and done their jobs inside a structure that was quietly being hollowed out by the people at the top. If I closed the door, they would all be pulled into the collapse along with the 3 people who deserved it. I realized the question I was actually facing had nothing to do with whether I had the power to act. The question was what I would do with that power when the people it would hurt most were people who had never wronged me. I called Malcolm back and gave him a set of conditions for a structured rescue. The current leadership had to be removed entirely. Client accounts had to be protected immediately. All outstanding wages had to be paid in full before any restructuring discussions moved forward. Vendor payment schedules had to be formalized and honored. Every fraudulent transaction had to be turned over to the appropriate authorities. And Audrey, Marjorie, and Derek were not to receive any benefit from whatever emerged on the other side of the process. I would protect the company's employees and clients. I would not protect the people who had built a fraud on top of them. Malcolm confirmed this plan and said the formal announcement would be made at the gala. 6 days before the event, Audrey filed for divorce. The petition described her as the primary financial contributor to our marriage. It requested full ownership of the house, exclusive use of the car, the majority of our shared savings, and required me to vacate the property within 30 days. It also included a clause prohibiting me from contacting any of Lennox Society Events partners or investors, and another barring me from attending any event connected to the company. She had also told the filing attorney that I had been harassing her out of jealousy over her professional relationship with Derek. Marjorie moved quickly after the filing. She had a relationship with a business media contact who ran a widely followed online interview series focused on Atlanta's professional community. The interview aired within 48 hours. Marjorie described me as a resentful, insecure man who had spent years living off his wife's success and was now trying to destroy her company because he couldn't stand watching her outgrow him. The segment circulated fast. A donor who had contributed to Brightwell Housing Collective for 3 consecutive years sent a message saying he was temporarily pausing his support while he assessed the situation. He didn't want the organization associated with a family dispute that was attracting public attention. I had lost the marriage. Now I was watching the work I had built for the better part of a decade begin to absorb the damage from a story I hadn't been given the chance to tell. Derek's role in all of it became clearer to me around this time, not through anything dramatic, but through the logic of his behavior. He had advised Audrey to move forward to file to go public, to show up at the gala with him on her arm, and treat the evening as a victory already secured. He told her that once the $18 million contract was announced, every legal complication would dissolve on its own. He was not giving her that advice because he believed it. He was giving it to her because it kept her moving in a direction that kept him protected. As long as Audrey was the one acting, Derek was just a consultant. The moment she stopped, someone might start looking more carefully at where the loan money had actually gone. He positioned himself beside her without ever positioning himself in front of her. Audrey removed my name from the gala guest list and notified the security team that I was not to be admitted. She sent me a photograph of herself and Derek in their event attire with a message that said the gala was a room for people with ambition and that I had never belonged there. Paige responded to the divorce filing with a counter-disclosure that laid out the documented facts the house could not be transferred because it belonged to Westmark Private Trust. The loan contained a forged signature. The funds had been partially redirected to Derek's company and to personal expenditures with no business purpose. My tax records had been accessed without authorization. And Audrey's claim to be the primary financial contributor to the marriage was factually inconsistent with the asset and income records Paige had already compiled. For the first time, I think Audrey understood that I was not going to simply absorb this and go away. But rather than recalibrate, she doubled down. She had made a public statement. She had filed legal documents. She had brought Derek into rooms where everyone could see them together. Reversing course now would require admitting she had been wrong, and that was something she had not done once in the 6 years I had known her. 2 days before the event, I came home to find the locks had been changed. My clothes were in boxes on the front step. There was a message from Audrey saying the marriage was over. There was a missed call from a Brightwell board member who had seen the interview, and there was still sitting in my email the formal confirmation from the Rhodes Sovereign Group trustees that I would be officially recognized as chairman at the Beaumont Benefactors Gala. I stood outside the house my family's trust owned, and I made a decision. I was not going to the gala to win Audrey back. That door had been closed, and I had stopped standing in front of it. I was going because there were employees who deserved to keep their jobs and vendors who deserved to be paid, and clients who had trusted a company with their most important days. None of them should have to pay for what 3 people had done in a room I hadn't been in. And I was going because Marjorie had built her entire strategy on the belief that I was powerless. I needed her to find out in the room that mattered most to her exactly how wrong that belief had been. The Magnolia Ballroom at the Ellison Hotel was exactly the kind of room Marjorie had spent her entire career trying to own. Crystal chandeliers, white floral arrangements on every table, silk linens and wine that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries in a month. The guests moved through it with the particular ease of people who had never had to think too carefully about what anything cost. Investors, hotel executives, board members, the kind of Atlanta money that didn't need to announce itself because the room already knew. I arrived in a plain black suit and walked in through the general guest entrance. I had thought about what it would feel like to come back into a space like this as the person I actually was. I had imagined it might feel like relief or vindication or something clean and final. What it felt like walking through those doors was just quiet. I wasn't there to make a statement with my entrance. I was there to do what needed to be done, and I wanted to see the room one last time as it saw me before everything changed. Audrey found me before the program began. She was in a silver gown moving through the crowd with Derek close behind her when she spotted me near the edge of the stage area. Whatever she had been feeling when she sent those boxes to the front step, whatever calculation had been running behind her eyes when she filed that petition, it surfaced immediately when she saw me standing there. She crossed the room with the specific kind of purpose that means a person has already decided how the conversation ends. She asked me why I was there. Her voice was controlled, but her jaw was tight. I told her I had one question and that I wanted her to answer it honestly. She told me I had been removed from the guest list and that security would handle the situation if I didn't leave on my own. I looked at her and asked clearly and directly whether she was willing to admit right there in front of her mother that the signature on the loan documents was not mine. She said no. Marjorie arrived at her shoulder almost immediately, the way she always did when she sensed a situation needed managing. She raised her voice just enough for the nearest tables to hear, accusing me of showing up to sabotage the most important night of her company's history, of being unable to accept that Audrey had outgrown me, of making a scene out of wounded pride. Guests began turning to look. Derek stood slightly behind Audrey, close enough to signal solidarity, far enough to maintain distance. He was watching the room more than he was watching me. I told them both that the loan had been under formal investigation for weeks, and that the findings would be part of the evening's proceedings. Audrey's expression shifted not into guilt, but into the particular look of someone who has decided that the best way to win an argument is to end it. She reached past the shoulder of a passing server, took a full glass of red wine off the tray, and threw it directly into my face. The room went silent. I didn't move. I stood with the wine running down the side of my face and soaking into my collar, and I looked at her, and I didn't say a word. Marjorie reached for a second glass from the same tray, turned to face the room as if she wanted witnesses, and poured it slowly and deliberately over my shoulder onto my jacket. Then she addressed the surrounding tables with the composed confidence of someone who had never once in her life considered the possibility that she might be wrong. She said that a man who had spent 6 years living off his wife's success did not belong in a room like this. A few people laughed. Most of the room simply watched. 2 security staff members began moving toward me from opposite sides of the hall. Malcolm Greer stepped down from the stage. He said my name, once my full name, and held up one hand toward the security team. Both of them stopped. The members of the Rhodes Sovereign Group board, who had been seated along the front section of the hall, stood up in sequence without being asked, without ceremony, the way people stand when they recognize the presence of someone they answer to. The laughter died. The room rearranged itself around a new understanding that arrived all at once and landed differently on every person in it. Malcolm introduced me as the controlling heir and incoming chairman of Rhodes Sovereign Group. I watched Audrey's face in the moment after he said it. She was holding an empty glass and she let it drop. Not dramatically, it simply left her hand. Marjorie had gone completely still, and I saw her eyes move to the ring I wore on my right hand, the one with the hawk crest my father had given me the year before he died, the same crest that appeared on every piece of Rhodes Sovereign Group letterhead, on every contract Lennox Society Events had ever received in connection with the $18 million bid. She had held those documents. She had read that name. She had simply never connected it to the man her daughter had married because it had never occurred to her that the man her daughter had married could be worth connecting it to. Derek stepped back from Audrey's side. He didn't say anything. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He simply was no longer standing next to her, and that absence was the most honest thing he had done all evening. I walked to the stage with wine still on my jacket. I didn't tell the room what had just happened to me. I didn't use the microphone to explain the loan, the divorce filing, the locked front door, the boxes on the step, or any of it. I said one thing, that status doesn't create character. It only gives a person the opportunity to reveal the character they already have. Then I handed the podium back to Malcolm and asked Audrey, Marjorie, and Derek to follow Paige into the private meeting room adjacent to the ballroom. Paige laid the evidence out one piece at a time. She started with the access log, the date and timestamp showing when Audrey had downloaded my tax records from the shared cloud account on the afternoon I had been gone all day for work. Audrey looked at the printout and said nothing. Paige waited, then set down the loan application beside it, the document bearing my name, my social security number, my forged signature. Marjorie's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes recalculated. Paige waited again before placing the wire transfer records on the table showing $64,000 moving to Sutter Strategic Advisory. Derek's name was on the receiving account. He looked at the document and looked away. Then came the receipts. The resort booking in South Carolina for 2 guests. The watch delivered to Derek's apartment. The vehicle rentals. The service invoices with no corresponding deliverables. The apartment deposit in Audrey's name. Each one landed in a silence that grew heavier as the pile grew. And then last Paige placed an email on the table, a message from Marjorie to Derek, written 3 months before the loan was filed, in which she explained the rationale for listing me as the guarantor. She had written it plainly without any apparent sense that it would ever be read by anyone outside that conversation. The logic she had used was simple. I would not be able to fight back. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Derek broke first. He said that every structural decision regarding the loan had been made by Audrey and Marjorie without his direct input, that his role had been strictly advisory, and that he had not been informed of the specific terms of the application. Audrey turned on him before he finished the sentence. She said he had provided the signature template. She said he had spent months telling her the company was the front runner for the Rhodes contract when he had known for weeks that it wasn't. She said he had told her that filing the divorce going public, showing up at the gala, that all of it was safe, that the contract would make every problem disappear. Marjorie cut in over both of them and told Audrey that she had allowed a personal relationship to compromise her professional judgment, and that the consequences of that judgment now belonged to her daughter alone. The alliance lasted exactly as long as it took for all the documents to be on the table. Audrey turned to me near the end of it. Her composure had broken in a way I hadn't seen before, not into tears, but into something rawer and more confused, like a person who had been walking toward a door for months and had just discovered it opened onto nothing. She said I had deceived her for 6 years. She said that everything would have been different if I had told her who I was from the beginning. She said it like it was an argument, like it changed the shape of what was on that table. I told her that what she had just said was the clearest explanation for why I couldn't save the marriage. A husband doesn't need to own a billion-dollar conglomerate to deserve to be treated like a person by his wife. She didn't answer that. The resolution that followed was not designed to punish. It was designed to separate consequences from collateral damage, which is a harder thing to do than it sounds when you're angry and you have the authority to do otherwise. Marjorie was removed from all operational roles at Lennox Society Events. Audrey's financial management authority was suspended pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. Derek's consulting contract was terminated. An independent management team was brought in to run day-to-day operations. Every outstanding employee wage was paid before the end of the following week. Client deposits were transferred into a protected escrow structure. Vendor payment schedules were formalized and honored. Every event that had already been contracted was fulfilled. The fraudulent transactions were turned over in full to the relevant authorities. Derek cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure. In doing so, he provided documentation confirming that Marjorie had been fully aware of the identity theft from the beginning, that she had not simply approved a decision Audrey had made, but had actively participated in structuring it. That cooperation was the final act of a man who had never been loyal to anyone but his own interests, and it cost Marjorie the one defense she might otherwise have had. She lost the company she had spent more than 20 years building, and the thing that brought it down was the same certainty that had defined her entire approach to the world. The absolute belief that she already knew exactly who people were and what they were capable of. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. The Westmark property was confirmed as trust held, and Audrey received no claim to it. She received no portion of the Rhodes estate or any connected holdings. I didn't pursue punitive terms beyond the documented losses. I asked only that she accept legal accountability for the loan and the transactions she had authorized. That was the full extent of what I wanted from her. Brightwell Housing Collective was publicly cleared once the investigation results were released. The donor who had paused his contribution returned. I didn't leverage my name or the Rhodes platform to amplify the organization's profile. I went back to the work sites the following Monday and did what I had always done. A year after the gala, I established Clear Ledger Foundation, built specifically to support people who had experienced identity fraud within a marriage or family relationship. The organization provided legal assistance, credit remediation, financial counseling, identity recovery services, transitional housing referrals, and support for small businesses damaged by fraudulent activity connected to someone they had trusted. Lennox Society events continued operating under a new name and an independent leadership team. The employees kept their jobs. The clients kept their events. The vendors were paid. At the first fundraising event for Clear Ledger Foundation, a young server carrying a tray of wine glasses clipped the edge of a table near where I was standing. A few drops landed on my sleeve. He looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. I took a napkin from the nearest table and told him not to worry about it. He apologized twice more, and I told him genuinely that wine on a jacket had never once changed what a person was worth. He laughed a little nervously and moved on. I stayed where I was for a moment and thought about the things that story had taught me, not the parts about money or legal strategy or how power actually works in a room full of people who think they understand it. The part that stayed with me was simpler than any of that. The people who humiliated me that night had been wrong, not because I turned out to be wealthy, but because they had decided that a person's value was something that could be read from a business card. They had been wrong about that before they ever found out who I was. The net worth was beside the point. How someone treats a person they believe has nothing to offer them, that's the only honest answer to the question of who they really are. If this story said something that felt true to you about respect, about what gets revealed when people think no one is watching, about the kind of person you want to be when you finally have the power to act, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, it would mean a lot to have you here. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them is about the same thing: what people are made of when it actually counts.